welcome to another Coding with AI podcast episode where we have conversations with humans who build apps with AI. I'm Marcelo, your host and the founder of iCode with AI. If you want to get a hold of me, just email me, marcelo@icodewith.ai. Now, in today's episode, this is a really important one, and I hope as many people as you can attend because we're talking about security, and specifically security for product builders and vibe coders. Very, very important. And our guest today, Josh Grossman, is the CTO and Application Security Specialist at Bound Security. So stay tuned for a really great conversation with him. But before we get started, a quick reminder to subscribe to the YouTube channel, click that bell icon to get notified when a new episode is out. And if you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you do, I think you will, make sure you hit that like button. If you didn't, send me an email and tell me why. I'll always like to improve all these episodes. So without further ado, let's get Josh in. Josh, welcome. Glad to have you here.
Hey, Marcelo. Great to be here. Thanks for having me today.
Now, it's early morning here. I'm in Southern California. You are in Israel, right?
Yeah, so it's early evening here.
There we go. I love doing these conversations with people all over the world. So glad to have you here. Thank you so much. I know you're a legend in the cybersecurity industry. Well, at least people tell me all the time. And every time I go, Josh is going to be on, they go, oh my God, you're so lucky. So thank you for being here. Real quick, for those that don't know your background, tell us about your background.
Yeah, so I sort of come from a computer science background. I did some sort of software development sort of along the way of my career, but I sort of got to the point where I wanted to specialize in security, and I sort of spent several years working in sort of IT risk and sort of general information security. And I sort of gradually realized that I could put the software development and the security stuff together and started to specialize in application security. And until a few years ago, I was working as an application penetration tester, coming in and sort of breaking applications. And it got to the point where I sort of felt like coming in every year and sort of going to the same clients and doing the same things and discovering the same things were still broken. I sort of felt like I wasn't really having the impact I wanted to have. And so nowadays, and what we sort of focus on about security is trying to help developers, up front, how to secure the applications, how to build security to begin with, how to build processes that enable that, with the aim that we build security in from the start and don't just wait until we come to the testing or to it's released and then to discover the problems. So that's sort of much of my day-to-day now at Bound Security, working with development teams or working with security teams, but with developers to try and help build security from the start. In my spare time, I'm also very involved with OWASP, the Open Worldwide Application Security Project, and we might talk about a little bit of that later on as well.
Oh, give us a quick overview of that. I was going to ask you about that.
Oh, yeah, great. So OWASP, the Open Worldwide Application Security Project, it's a sort of non-profit organization with chapters all over the world and lots of different projects. And the aim is to develop resources to help people build securely. So that might be documentation that explains how to do certain things in a secure way. That may be checklists of, here are the things you need to think about when you're building an application. I think the most sort of famous project is probably the OWASP Top 10, which is almost like a marketing document to say, well, here are 10 things you should be particularly concerned about right now. The overall aim is to try and build resources that developers can use and to skill up on security or understand, okay, how do I solve this particular problem when I'm building an application?
And this is a really important resource, actually, because especially for vibe coders, which is our focus today, is vibe coders and what I call product builders, right? Which are they're product builders that do not hand code, but they use vibe coding techniques to ship maintainable, scalable, and secure, hopefully, products. But as vibe coders, we use a lot of this documentation to guide AI, right? And maybe using this resource that you recommended right now is a great way to tell AI, hey, when we're creating this app, make sure you follow these checklists or these rules.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely very, very possible, and it can definitely be a useful resource. I guess the trick is to figure out, okay, which parts of which documentation do I provide to the AI at which point in time? Because I guess, certainly in my experience, if you say, okay, well, so for example, the project that I'm sort of most involved with, I'm a project leader of, is called the ASVS, the Application Security Verification Standard, which is sort of quite a detailed checklist and list of requirements about sort of what you want to build into your application. Now you can try and feed that whole thing in every time, but you certainly can't rely on the AI just knowing what the ASVS is and following the requirements without you sort of expressly providing those requirements. Then it's which requirements you're going to provide all of them every single time. What's that going to do to the size of your queries? So I think there's a lot of subtlety in how you apply that as well. But certainly the resources are there.
Yeah, definitely. And definitely for anybody watching right now, I don't feel that any of these resources for AI will ever be a replacement for a true security human like you, right? Depending on the risk, let's talk a little bit about app risk. And I know we're jumping a little bit ahead because I want to set some baseline, but let's talk a little bit about risk assessment, right? Because when I'm presenting, they always ask me, how do I make sure things are secure? I go, well, it depends on your risk assessment, right? If you have an app that is just for you and nobody else is ever going to touch it, and it's just locally to you, who cares what happens? But as your risk goes up and impacts of risk go up, then obviously you want to make sure it's secure. What are your thoughts on that? And give us a little bit of some tips on that.
Yeah, I think there's certainly a lot of people are using this for their own entertainment or sort of very simple, uninteresting things. I think my favorite thing I saw recently, I think, was the CEO or the founder of Base 44 was getting married, and he created the Base 44 app to tell people what they should get him as a wedding present. It was basically a joke to tell that the CEO of Wix who bought them should buy him a big present. Everyone else just shouldn't bother. But he basically built this joke app very fast on his own platform. And if you're building something that's not serious, not important, then obviously it doesn't matter that much. But certainly once you get to the stage where you're going to have real users, or you're going to be putting your own real data into the application, if you're going to start putting sensitive data into the application or doing some sort of sensitive operations, certainly with the rise of MCPs, we're seeing that suddenly AI agents have access to do all sorts of different tasks. So once it gets into that realm, then you certainly need to start thinking about, what could go wrong here? How could this be manipulated? How could this be misused? I think one of the challenges is that you want to think about that early on. As soon as this becomes likely, you want to think about that, because you don't want to get to a stage where you're so far down the road of building and developing and sort of rolling out. You've now got something out there, and you're like, oh well, I've now got a bunch of users. I've now got a bunch of sensitive data. What should I have done about security? So trying to think about something up front, I think, is really important. It's sort of having an awareness of when am I moving from something that's unimportant or doesn't have sensitive information to something that actually is going to have some sort of risk associated with it, and being sort of mindful of when that's going to happen.
Well, and we can actually bring up a real world example of when it went wrong, right? Like the T app that happened. I don't know, was it this year? I forget exactly when it happened, but maybe you can give a little bit overview of what happened there, and how could that have been prevented?
So yeah, I think I don't know if they ever proved it was specifically down to AI coding, but it seemed like they'd made some pretty basic mistakes in the way that they'd developed the application and the way that they were storing secrets and providing access to data. And I think those are the things we see sort of over and over again, where either secrets are revealed either in the application source code that's been put up on GitHub or in the application's front end, because there hasn't been sort of enough differentiation between what's the application front end that the user's going to have access to and what's the back end that's sort of out the way that the user doesn't have access to. And sort of the same sort of issue around that database access. I can't remember exactly if T was a leak of the
I think it was an
database,
S3 bucket that was public.
So, so public buckets, again, sort of very classic, and not something that just happens in vibe coding, but obviously it's a lot easier to get there. It's a lot easier to get into a vulnerable application fast when you're using some sort of AI code builder.
Well, and let's talk about that. So we're going to jump into security frameworks. So we're going to try to set the baseline so people understand what are these security frameworks that they should at least understand. But from your perspective, from a security perspective, is there really a difference between a vibe coded app and a hand coded app by a developer from your perspective?
So I think let's say the idealistic answer is no. It's all code. Someone needs to be responsible for that code. A human being needs to be responsible for that code, and whether that code is secure or not. I think that's sort of the idealistic answer. I think practically speaking, though, we can't ignore the velocity aspect, the fact that once upon a time developers are sat typing out code by hand, and now they're writing a prompt and suddenly 10,000 lines of code fly out, and what used to work for handwritten code isn't going to necessarily work for that velocity of code being written. And I think that's the key difference. It's I'm always trying to be sort of, I guess, solution focused and accepting things as they are. We're not going to manually review 10,000 lines of code as a security person in time for the developers to roll out. So we have to think about, well, how are we going to, how can we build security into the process that's actually the product builder is going through to build that code, and how can we make it easier for them to apply that security guidance, and how can we take the same sort of techniques that they're using to accelerate the development, how can we use those to accelerate security?
So let's take a little step back because we jumped right into vibe coding and everything, but I want to take just one step back so everybody is sort of on the same baseline and can understand what security frameworks are. So maybe you can give us sort of a high level perspective or of what are security frameworks that vibe coders and product builders should understand and be aware of, so at least they can start their research on it and at least start looking into some of those things to implement in their vibe coding.
So I think there are a few different, we can talk through sort of detailed resources if we want to, about sort of what we might want to think about. But I think one of the most powerful techniques, I think, and it's something that my my boss at Bounce Security is an expert on, is threat modeling. The idea of, okay, well, before we go into building an application or as we're designing an application, thinking about what can go wrong. And I think that certainly, in the older world where we were going more slowly, then we have more time to do that potentially. But I think it's still, that sort of mindset, I think, is still very valuable. And I think that I think one of the key things is having that in mind. Whatever we're doing, whatever we're whether we're writing code by hand, whether we're writing prompts that they're then going to develop into code, thinking about, okay, what can go wrong? Like, I'm building this feature, it's going to be really cool. I'm building this functionality, I'm really excited by it, but what's going to ruin my day? What's going to make that go wrong? And how can I capture that as I'm laying out what needs to happen? And that can apply in sort of old style coding when we're building design documents or requirements, and that can apply in vibe coding when we're building prompts or we're building rules or we're building some sort of spec document to describe the application. I think that's one of the primary things is, first of all, what can go wrong, and then maybe being aware of some of sort of the most common and most basic issues that we see again and again in these sorts of applications.
But for somebody that is a vibe coder, they're not gonna. What I'm trying to ask here is really, how do they know what could go wrong? If you don't know what could go wrong, how could they want to ask, okay, what could go wrong? But the reality is they may not even know what could go wrong, right? Because they may not understand the code. Is there some non-negotiables from your perspective that you say, look, even if you're just starting out and you don't know about code, you got to make sure you check this, and this. What are some of those that you feel are non-negotiables before you put this out for public?
Okay, so if we're going to talk sort of specific risks or specific issues, and I think some of the key ones, let's see, I'd say probably authentication, authorization, secrets management, and how we interact with backend data sources or backend sort of services. So if we start off with authentication authorization, we want to make sure that every single operation is going to check, okay, is the user that is requesting to do this, is this definitely the user that we're expecting? Is this definitely the user that is allowed to do that? Josh is asking to access this data. Does Josh have access to this data? Josh has read-only access. Should you have access to write to this piece of data? And generally being very, very sure that every single operation that's happening, and this is something that has to happen at the back end. We can't rely on, say, the front end. Okay, well, Josh can't see this screen, therefore he must not have access to it, because it may well be that it can still be accessed via an API at the back end or something. So I think authentication authorization is something that's very easy to to miss, and you add in a new piece of functionality, you forget to add in the authentication check or the authorization check. It's one of those things where if you can plan, okay, how am I doing that up front? How am I making sure that up front, and how can I sort of roll that out easily across the future functionality that I'm going to build? And I think that's something that we see challenging when it's not planned up front, when it's sort of done on an ad hoc basis. Where okay, well, I'll check this in this function, I'll check that in that function, and I'll sort of bury this particular. Like when it's done in a decentralized way, it gets a lot harder to make sure it's actually everywhere's actually covered. So I think that's one of the first key areas to be aware of up front. The second is secrets management. So this is.
Let's clarify that first before you jump into how to manage those secrets. Clarify what secret management is for people to really truly understand and grasp that.
Okay, so secrets are generally either encryption keys or passwords that the application is using to, maybe using it to encrypt data, maybe using these passwords to interact with other backend services or the database. It may be using the secret to sign some sort of authentication authorization token, and it therefore relies on that to be sure that the user is definitely the who they say they are. So these are values that need to be kept secret, and I think it's useful to think about in some way. I think there's a principle in cryptography called Kirchhoff's principle. I don't want to get into it. It basically says that as long as if you know everything apart from the secret, the system should still be secure. And I think we can apply that more widely to an application. You should assume that a user or an attacker or someone who's looking at your application, let's assume they know everything about your application. They know every single line of code. They know every detail about how it's implemented. They know about all the services it's using behind the scenes. The one thing they don't have is the encryption keys and the passwords, and as long as they don't have those, the system should still be secure. And that's one of the reasons that protecting these items is so important, because it's going to be the encryption keys are what you're using to store the sensitive data that you're storing on a database. The passwords may be what you're using to interact with, let's say, AWS or GCP or Azure, whatever your cloud provider is, to manage resources in there. And if those leak, that's suddenly a very major breach of the security of your application, potentially allows an attacker to get all sorts of access they shouldn't have.
I think I was muted there. And one of those things that I've noticed that people do sometimes is they check it into Git. They check some of these secrets into Git, and then they realize, oh my gosh, it's in GitHub. Let me take it out and then do another check-in. But the reality is it's still out there as an older check-in, right? So how can they prevent something like that? Because that's a common mistake.
So I think for secrets specifically, I think most source control most source control mechanisms have some sort of check or some sort of pre-commit hooks that you can use to detect, okay, you're about to commit a secret, you probably shouldn't do that. I know that certainly the different platforms that we tend to do this sort of coding on, be it within GitHub Actions, or if we're using Replit or Base44, they've all got their own sort of specific secret storage mechanisms. It's all documented. Okay, this is where you store the secrets. This is how you do it. So I think there's generally sort of a good the correct way of doing it, and it's just a question of making sure that it's not going to end up in source control by mistake, and that you've got some sort of scanner that's going to flag that up. And then the other half of that, I guess, is trying to keep track of, okay, well, what secrets am I using? What are my crown jewels? What are the secrets that if they leak, we're going to have a bad time? And no, okay, well, how do I rotate that? Let's say something happens, someone makes a mistake, or I accidentally gets exposed. I don't know, I paste my root password into the group chat instead of into AWS. Hands up who hasn't done that. Fine. Okay, that happens. How do I rotate it? How do I invalidate the old secret and get a new one? And this is something that it may be a slightly manual process. It may be something you can automate, but that may be the difference between this mistake being a small one, unknown mistake, and someone taking that key and spinning up a whole lot of Bitcoin mining in your AWS account or something.
And it's important. And it's important because if you properly develop your app where you have central secret management, then if something like that happens, you can go to that one location and update it as opposed to remembering you have it in 20 different places, right, within the app, which AI is known to do that. It'll create code, same code in multiple places just to give you what you want, unless you guide it properly to say, don't do that, right?
Yeah, yeah. And so there's always going to be that sort of the two halves of it are going to be, okay, well, where do I rotate, and then where do I put the secret once it's been rotated? Generally, there'll be the console where that secret is actually generated, and then the secrets management location where you're storing that secret for the application to use. But yeah, certainly if you're doing it in using one of the pre-built mechanisms, doing it in one central place, then certainly it's going to be a lot easier to achieve that at speed. And
Yeah,
I think I mentioned it briefly for authorization, but I think it comes up again and again. I think the idea of don't repeat yourself and having a
right.
centralized way to solve a particular security problem, I think is also really, really key to sort of making sure that there aren't going to be mistakes, and have one way of doing things and then use that way wherever else. And again, if you've got that mechanism, then that's something you can include in your rules files, and then you've got that. Okay, this is the right way of doing it. This is what has to happen each time, and therefore I know where that particular control is enforced.
So one of the things I push really hard on is for vibe coders and product builders to have this sort of systems mentality, systems architecting mentality, right? So they can structure what they're doing properly so they can guide the AI.
Mm.
The thing that I never talk about, even with myself when I'm vibe coding, is having a security mindset and mentality. So let's talk a little about that. How do we, as product builders, get into that from when the question is what are you building? Like with my Cody framework, the first question is what are you building, and you go from there, right? You refinement, you create your PRD, but how do you start with from that point? How do you start with like this has to be secure?
Um, it's funny you talk about what are we building, and again, thinking about threat modeling, one of the sort of the common things, one of the common frameworks for threat modeling is sort of known as the four questions, because and the first question is what are we building, and then the second question is, well, what can go wrong? And I think
Oh,
that sort of needs to be part of it, and I think that also. So I often we talk about systems thinking. We talk about, okay, we need to be a little bit more intentional about how
right,
we're developing this application, and I would imagine that the primary reason for that is to try and enforce a certain quality level within the application, so that we're building something in a slightly more organized way, so that we're going to end up with a higher quality app. And I guess one of the things that I talk about a lot, that I think the security industry has done a very good job of trying to demonstrate how it's really, it's this like whole special magical thing that it's this mythical wizardry that no one understands apart from these sort of security experts, and therefore it's sort of tried to make security a very sort of special snowflake.
right.
Whereas I always try and say the opposite. I say security isn't special. Security is another property of quality. And in the same
Mm,
way that you need an application that was going to respond within a decent amount of time, you may define, okay, well, these are the performance requirements when I'm defining this new feature. And you may want to define user experience requirements when you're defining a new feature, because if the user doesn't understand how to use a feature, then it's not going to be any good. So it comes to the same thing. Okay, well, another aspect of quality is going to be security. Okay, well, what do I need? What are going to be the quality components from a security perspective in this new feature? What can go wrong? What should happen? What shouldn't happen? What shouldn't be able to happen? And I guess as you're developing this sort of this view of, okay, well, this is how I want this new feature to be developed. These are going to be the quality principles I want from this new feature. Trying to include security alongside that, and think about again, just thinking about it from a business perspective, a functionality perspective. What is going to ruin my day? And I think that there are lots of checklists about these are the security issues that could happen. These are the specific attacks that could happen. But I think often just thinking about, well, what's going to make this feature go wrong, what's going to cause a major something bad to happen from a business perspective, is often a great place to start. What's going to ruin my day?
right. Yeah, that's a good question. It's already creating what's going to ruin my day if something goes wrong, basically. That's
Mhm.
so do you think that AI could help identify some of these potential issues? So in other words, Is there a way to create an AI agent, not to replace a human, but at least to give a preliminary, right? To give a preliminary list of going like, hey, these are potential issues that you may have here. What are your thoughts on, and should it be the same AI agent that you're using to code? In other words, let's say I'm using Claude Code and I'm using Sonnet 4.5. Should it be the same model? Should I throw it to Codex and have Codex check on, Claude Code? Any tips on that?
From what I've seen, it's I think there are. I think the most important thing is having something that understands how the code fits together. Obviously something like Claude Code is very good at navigating a code base and figuring out how different parts go together. Um, it seems like other AI agents have had sort of more difficulty doing that. So I think it's important that the agent has an understanding of how the code fits together, how functionality, what's the code flow, what's the data flow. Um, and once you're sort of comfortable with that, it becomes a question of how do you sort of get high value output from the AI agent. And again, I think it comes down to that sort of context engineering aspect where, okay, well, what do you want it to sort of base its review on? What things do you want it to sort of focus on specifically? I think it was Claude Code over the summer had they released sort of their security review thing, and I think they're like, oh, we've got this brand new security review, and it was basically just it was a prompt to tell Claude Code to do some sort of security review, and I think it had some sophistication in there, but I think often um, it does come down to saying, okay, well, I want to be a little bit more specific. I want to tell the whatever the AI agent is. I want to tell it what should we be more concerned about, what should we be less concerned about. Be that a type of attack, be that a type of risk, because otherwise, I've seen examples where I say, okay, well, are there any security problems here, and it will end up with sort of a very mixed bag of things that are sometimes real, sometimes not real, sometimes important, sometimes not important. So I think sort of investing some time in that, um, building that context effectively up front is important. It's obviously challenging to do when you've got less security knowledge, but again, at the same time, we've talked about, okay, what are the essentials, what are the key basic things, and certainly, if you're asking it specifically about those, and at least you're directing it in some way, saying, okay, I want you to make sure that I don't have any authorization issues in this application, or can you go through the different endpoints and make sure that each has my sort of chosen authorization mechanism applied. So I think that's certainly something that can be very powerful. But when it comes to more general, I think you end up with a mixed responses.
So I really think the key here is that we all need to become more knowledgeable about security from a high level perspective, at least to start to understand how to be a better guide AI. Because at the end of the day, as product builders, all we're doing is, we call it vibe coding, but it's not coding, it's vibe guiding, to be honest, right? We're
Yeah.
guiding AI into creating something we want. AI is doing the coding. So we need to be able to guide it in a way also to make sure that it's not just it's vibe security coding or secured coding, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're certainly seeing, um, I guess, different players in the security space sort of approach this problem in different ways, trying to come up with sort of pre-built security agents or pre-built security prompts. It's something that we're not working on that as sort of a wider thing, but it's something I'm looking at with the clients that I work with. Okay, how can we build specific prompts that sort of solve the specific problems that we're seeing? I think that it's on the one hand, I think it's being sort of aware of what security resources out there, and using those as to inform, okay, well, what can go wrong here. I think it's also about saying, well, if I up front have a standard prompt or a standard rule that defines what needs to happen from a security perspective, and that can be used on an ongoing basis, and maybe there'll be some maintenance there, but I think that by having whereas once upon a time, every time you build some new code, you need someone, a security person, to come in and say, okay, well, what's going on here? It may be that you can take a good prompt or a well-written agent and use that on a recurring basis to look at, okay, well, this is a new thing that I've built using this agent that's been designed up front. Okay, what what do I need to know about this from a security perspective? So I think there's definitely some scope for efficiency there. It's not that, okay, well, now every vibe code needs to memorize everything about security and have that in their head all the time. I think it also gives us an opportunity to say, well, let's lay down some rules, and maybe we get an expert to help us lay down those rules once, and then we can use those on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, definitely. So we spoke about authentication, secret management. There are some big risks with community libraries. Like, for example, when AI may suggest, oh, let's install this library that we need, let's say for Python, right? Something called, I believe it's slop squatting, where AI may hallucinate or pull automatically, right? Something that is similar to a real one, but it's not. It's by a person that just wants to break into your system. Can you explain a little bit of that, and how can we mitigate those risks?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big challenge. Ultimately, I can't remember what the percentages are, but generally we're using a whole bunch of code that someone else has written, and not only now as we move into this sort of AI coding, it's not even it's not even that the human has manually found a library and told integrated that into the application. That's now, okay, well, the AI agent has decided that these are the 10 libraries that this application is going to need, and it's brought in these 10 libraries. We asked it to do something a little bit specific. It's going to come up with a library to do that. Where's that library come from? Who's built that library? Who's maintaining that library? Can we trust that library? And once that library gets integrated, that's now it's running on our development machines. It's running in our production environment. We need to have some level of trust in that library, and it's something that's been a problem for a long time. But again, once you have AI building code, bringing in libraries a lot faster than previously, it's still something that needs to be looked at. Now, in theory, it's something you can look at manually. It's something that you can say, okay, well, these are the libraries that I'm using. I'm going to go and check what the provenance of these libraries are, and at least if the main library looks like it's legit, looks like it's been maintained, looks like it's by someone reliable, then we're okay. There are also different services that will do that as well. Again, I think because there are two sides to this. There's the vulnerabilities in libraries where someone develops a third-party library, but they write a vulnerability into their library, and now you incorporate that library, and you might have vulnerabilities in your code. And there's also the malicious side as well, where someone creates a library that's deliberately designed to either look like a legitimate library or to have the same
And
name
it's
as
just
something that AI
misspelled
can
by one
generate.
letter, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think people have even tried, as you said, like slop squatting and sort of trying to squat on hallucinations, so that if the AI makes up a library, it'll actually resolve, and you'll end up with this sort of malicious library in your code base. And it's, the vulnerability side, the malicious side, are sort of two slightly different things. With it seems to be a lot of vendors are sort of doing them separately, or different vendors are doing different the two different things. But it's something that some of the platforms might have built in some way of assessing those libraries, but it may also be that you have to have some sort of regiment where you say, okay, well, these are the libraries, these are the primary libraries I'm using in my application. I'm going to have some way of knowing where they come from. That may be you have an AI agent that knows how to say, okay, well, for each library I've got in my package.json or package.lock, whatever, go and figure out, give me some information. Where's that from? What's the source repo for that library? Who's the developer? Does it have? So there's a mechanism called the I think it's the open. There's an organization called the OpenSSF, the Open Source Security Foundation, which is a sort of a sub part of the Linux Foundation. They've got a tool called some sort of security scorecard, where it sort of gives a library a particular grade based on certain security factors related to that open source library. So maybe you can ask it to pull you that score if it exists.
What was the name of that source resource again?
The OpenSSF scorecards.
Okay,
I
cool.
can see.
Maybe you can send it to me later, and we'll post it under resources in the landing page for people.
Yeah, certainly. If you search OpenSSF scorecard, that will come up. And
Excellent.
some libraries use it, some libraries don't use it. But it's an indicator if you've got that. But if you don't have that, you may have to try and figure that out yourself.
Well, that goes
Yeah,
with to a lot of people giving like full permission to, let's say, Claude or Codex, whatever development agent to their system, right? And say, yeah, install whatever you want. To me, that's a very dangerous thing. At a minimum, you should let it install, but verify what it's installing before you do that. But it'd be great to put that resource in the agent file and say that before you install anything, whatever you're about to install, go check to that resource to make sure that it's a valid. I mean, it's, and what I'm hearing here, honestly, which is the same thing with structural vibe coding, it's all about being educating and learning, not how to hand code, but at a minimum, understanding what you're creating here from all aspects, technical, business side, everything.
yeah, and I think that's I don't know. I see it as interesting because I think that once upon a time the software development was a very waterfall thing. You'd have a long requirements gathering session, then you'd have like a long design stage, and then you'd build the application, and then you'd test the application, whatever else. And gradually, we've got into sort of more agile process where those stages happen very very fast over a short period of time. And I think those those sort of sprints within an agile process where okay, you have a new feature, you decide what it's going to do, you design it, you build it, and all within the sort of space of 2 weeks. And those sprints have sort of gradually got faster and faster until it's been, I think, quite difficult for people to really spend time planning on what they're doing. And I think it may be that as we sort of see the AI engineering sort of mature, maybe we're sort of going slightly back to that design mentality, because the rules and the prompts and the specifications are being built that are necessary in order to get the AI to generate what you actually need to generate become that design. And they also gives us opportunity to say, okay, what else do we need to do at this stage? What other things do we need to think
Right.
about? And maybe that's how am I going to make sure it doesn't write insecure code? How am I going to make sure it doesn't infect me with bad libraries? How am I going to make sure that it's scales and is responsive? And it gives the opportunity to, I think, build those considerations in as well.
And I think that's the whole idea of spec-driven development, right? That the spec is your single source of truth now, and you use that to generate code. You're no longer creating that document and then never looking at it again. That document is where you create, you update, you maintain, and you generate from there, right? And I think having that mentality to not only think about your features, but also think about what are the security. I think to me, what I'm getting out of this for me personally, that I will start doing immediately is in every step of my app creation, I'm going to ask what can go wrong. It's a simple question with a very complicated possible answer, actually, but it's definitely a question that I think we all need to ask. Like, what could go wrong here? And in fact, we
Yeah,
could
I
even
think
ask AI that, right? Like when we're creating a new feature, we can say, okay, we want to do this, but what can go wrong with this?
um, you can do. I think it's a good thought exercise for the human developer as well, because I think it fosters that mindset of, well, let's deal with the possibles. Let's deal with what could happen here. I think there's sort of a trope in security that you say, okay, well, there's this security problem, and a developer or product manager says, okay, well, why would anyone do that? Or they'll never figure that out, or I don't know, they won't discover that because it's hidden. And I think using that what can go wrong to sort of as a thought experiment, okay, well, what are the possibilities here? What could happen? Maybe you decide, okay, that's very very unlikely, so maybe I'm gonna not going to give that higher priority. But at the same time, it's sort of developing that thinking of always thinking about what should happen and what shouldn't happen, and making sure that you don't get sort of so caught up in, well, this is what should happen, that you forget about what shouldn't happen.
Right, definitely. We're getting pretty close to the end here, but I wanted to get what are some other tips that you recommend vibe coders, product builders, to really keep in mind, like even if you're doing an MVP, even if you're doing a prototype that is not going to see the light of day with real users, um, what are your top three, top five, whatever you want to throw tips that keep this in mind, besides asking what could go wrong, right? That's number one on the list.
I think if it's an MVP that you're throwing away, then I guess you're less concerned. It may well be that there's no sensitive data that goes into that. But if there's a chance that you build this MVP and then suddenly someone says, okay, well, now we need this in production tomorrow for real users, then you want to make sure that you're trying to think about security before you get to that stage. It's very hard to try and build security after you've already released something, after it's already working, and now you're trying to go back and sort of patch the holes. It's a lot easier to do it as you're going along. I think the biggest thing is to try and as you're building up your spec, as you're building up your plan, put the security considerations in there as well. On a wider level, certainly sort of look into some of the security resources. I've talked about OWASP. The ASVS is one resource that you can use for finding sort of, okay, what could go wrong? What do I need to think about from a security perspective? There's also another project called Minimum Viable Secure Product, which is a bit enterprise focused, but certainly there are sections 2 and 3 of that I think are a lot more sort of specific and give you some checklist of things to think about. Okay, what might happen here? What might I need to be worried about? Maybe you read through and you say, well, I'm not worried about that because this is very early stage. I'm not worried about this because it's very early stage. But again, it's about having some sort of corpus. Not everyone knows everything about security, and having some sort of structured way of approaching that, I think, makes it a lot easier to think about what might I have forgotten. And if you can take those resources and build them into what the spec that you're building, or your building process. I've spoken to people who've got multiple coding agents they're using to sort of cover multiple areas of an application or multiple parts of an application. If you can have an additional one that thinks about security and is based on those resources, then maybe that can get you quite a long way as well in terms of making sure that what's being built is going to be secure.
Looking forward into the future, because more and more apps are being vibe coded, and the enterprise is definitely adopting AI for AI assisted coding, right? But a lot of the times they're also vibe coding in the enterprise, even developers, right, to kick off a project. How do you see the future of application in security? Do you see we are gonna be secure as we are today? Obviously, apps are still not 100% secure, even if they're coded by humans. But do you see we're going to get worse? We're going to get better? What's your outlook? Now, obviously, it's your opinion because who knows the future, but.
Yeah. I think that as there's this sort of, it's almost like sort of centralization. There aren't 1,000 different coding agents. There aren't 1,000 AI coding platforms. I think we're gradually going to see, I think, people sort of solidifying around a few. And I think if those platforms, if those systems can start building some security practices built into their own system prompts or their own mechanisms, then I think that may take a lot of pressure off the people using those platforms, and potentially reduce the amount that people have to be thinking about sort of every basic thing. I'm quite hopeful that we will see things move in that direction. I talked about Claude Code's security review. I think that's, again, very, very early stage, but that sort of thing makes a lot of sense. Having something in the agent that we're using that's built in, that uses common security resources and can sort of specifically reference them and specifically use them to analyze the code that's being built, I think is I think there's a very, very big opportunity there. And obviously, individual people can't necessarily do that themselves, but maybe they can influence through product feedback or whatever else. Things like we look at Base 44 and Replit. I think they've had applications on them have had very high profile and very clear security failures. If they can learn from those security failures and build that in, so when someone is trying to build that again and build that vulnerability again, they're being asked by their platform, "Are you sure you want to do that? Because this is going to be bad," and links to the news article or something. Like, I think that there's a big opportunity there. So I think that the centralization brings the opportunity for security to be built into the platforms and into the central agents. And I think it's in general, I think there's an opportunity for acceleration. The same way that the AI accelerates development, I think can also accelerate security review, and hopefully make sure that security can keep up with this sort of new pace of development.
It's definitely a very, very fast pace, right? I mean, we're going from months and months of implementation to literally hours and days sometimes, which
Yeah.
is it's both exhilarating, exciting, awesome, but also could be potentially dangerous, right? If not done properly. So, where one final thought, like if you want people when they're done watching this, that you want that something to stick in their mind about security of it, or anything you want, but about security, what would that be?
I think know which resources you can go to find information. OWASP, MVPS, know in your mind, okay, this is what I'm going to refer to, and then look at, well, how can I apply that when I'm building a spec? I think those are sort of the two key things. You've got the resources available, now you just need to apply them.
And finally, how do you when should we bring in a human in the loop? I think that's extremely important too. But when do you say let's bring a human in the loop now, regardless? And regardless if not AI just coded it, right? And when I mean by human in the loop, I mean a security human, not just any human,
Mhm.
right? When do we bring a security human in the loop?
Um, I mean, it's always going to be a little bit relative. Um, yeah, it's hard to say at this particular stage. Obviously, once you identify, okay, there are particular risks that, um, if they were to happen, they would cost me money, they would cost me reputation, they would cost me legal issues. Then at that point, maybe you need to, I guess, bringing a human into the loop is generally going to cost money. And you have to say, well, I've now got a risk that costs me money, and therefore I want to spend money to try and avoid that happening. And I think that's one of the sort of the common aspects. But you got to be clear. Okay, what is the risk here? Maybe I don't feel like there's a big risk here, but actually, the country I'm in has legislation that would fine me for doing
Right.
this by
A
this.
legal risk.
Yeah, and sort of being aware of um, what are the potential outcomes, and at that point, you maybe want to invest in someone to come along and say, well, this is what we've been doing up until now. What else should we be doing? What else can we build into our processes to try and make sure we're not going to end up with sort of nasty vulnerabilities. So I think once you have that sensitive information, once you're doing that sensitive operations, or just before, ideally, then that's the time you need to say, okay, well, do I need someone to at least review what's happening? And hopefully it'll be less in depth. If you've already done something, hopefully it's more of a review role than it is a in-depth line-by-line analysis. But I think you certainly, I think with all these AI agents, all these AI processes, you always need the human in the loop at some point. I don't think
Agreed.
there's many that can be completely autonomous.
Yeah, definitely. And finally, how do you see the future of vibe coding, security, AI? Just what's your take on the future? How do you see everything evolving here? Seems like it's a very different world.
Yeah, like I say, I think they need to, security and vibe coding need to sort of evolve together. This, whether it's vibe coding, whether it's AI assisted engineering, they need to evolve together. What worked yesterday isn't going to work today.
Yeah,
And I think we've known in security for a long time that we've not been keeping up with velocity, and now that problem is 10 times, 100 times, and
right.
finding ways to use LLMs and use AI to accelerate security is going to be the only way that works.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I have so many more questions for you, Josh, but unfortunately we're out of time. Thank you so much for spending the time with us, educating us. I'm being honest, man. From now on, my second question after why do I want to create is what could go wrong. It's definitely stuck in my mind. I mean, it's a simple question that has huge ramifications if you don't ask it. So thank you for enlightening us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I'll send a link to the four. Like I said, there are four questions. As
Yeah.
to the last two, what we're going to do, what we're going to do about it, and do we do enough good enough job? I think that came from a framework from a guy called Adam Shostak. So maybe I'll send a link
Okay.
to that as well. But
Yeah, yeah. Send me the links to any of the resources. I'll put them on the landing page so people can get them, and with that also they can find information about you there. But tell us real quick for you, how do they get a hold of you? Best way?
yeah, best way to find me, you can find me on LinkedIn, Josh Grossman, or you can find my website, joshcgrossman.com, or Josh C. Grossman on Twitter or X, whatever it's called now. But yeah, LinkedIn's probably the best option. So yeah, feel free to add me there. And if you've got further questions you want to get in contact, then yeah, be in touch.
You've been a wonderful guest. Thank you so much, Josh. I really appreciate you being here. And have a good
You're
evening
very
there in
welcome.
Israel. I know it's late, so thank you for staying up.
No problem. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And thanks to the rest of you for being here today. I hope you really enjoyed this episode. Man, I've learned so much that my vibe coding, product building is definitely changing literally as of this episode. moving forward. Thank you so much for being here. As always, if you want to get hold of me for any reason, send me an email, Marcelo at icodewith.ai, or check out my website, icodewith.ai. I'd love to hear from you. Also, if you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Click that bell icon to get notified when a new episode is out. And if you enjoyed this episode, hit the like button. If you didn't, send me an email and tell me why. So, got more episodes coming up for you, so stay tuned for them. Thank you so much, and we will see you on the next one. Cheers, everybody.